3 scary stories from r/paranormal. I'll start by saying that I'm 19 years old now and these hauntings occurred from 7 to 8 years old. I'm not a religious person at all, I'm one of those people that has to see something to believe it. When people tell me stories of how this or that happened to them, I always try to come up with a logical explanation for what they experienced. That being said, this shook me to my core and I avoid sharing what happened to me with other people simply because I cannot even think about this time in my life without swelling up in tears. As a child I didn't like scary movies, ghost stories, none of that stuff. I was scared of the dark and bedtime for me was a struggle because my mother would have to sit beside my bed until I went to sleep before she was able to go to her room. After I would fall asleep I would always wake up at around 2 a.m. and be scared that I was alone and walk to my mother's room down the hall to get into bed with her and go back to sleep. The only people in the house during this time were my older sister, mom, and me. The first incident I had occurred when I woke up in the middle of the night again and I got up to go to my mother's room. When I got to her room and opened the door, that's when I seen it. An extremely pale, short, bald man was sitting in the middle of her bed. I was paralyzed in fear and just stared at the man for a few seconds, trying to understand what I was looking at. The man's head picked up and looked at me as I stood in the doorway. His face was completely smooth. No eyes, mouth, anything. Just a powder white face. The moment I seen him look up at me I immediately collapsed into the floor and started to scream and cry and call for my mother to wake up. My mom jumped up out of bed and ran over to me and tried to calm me down. I was trying to tell her there was a man in her room but she kept telling me it was just a bad dream, that I needed to go back to bed. I looked around the room, intending to show her but I didn't see the man anymore. When I calmed down a bit I asked if me and her could both stay in my room for the night because I was too frightened to sleep alone but I didn't want to go back into her room. The morning after, I tried to explain to my mom what I seen the night before but she didn't want to hear it. She shrugged it off and told me it was just a bad dream. I was so sure of what I had seen and I tried to tell my sister but she dismissed me as well. After this experience I was terrified that it would happen again. The following nights were horrible. My mother would tuck me into bed like usual and wait until I fell asleep to leave, except now I was faking that I was asleep so she would go into her room. When she left I would get up and turn all the lights in my room on and play around with my action figures or play on the PlayStation. I would do this until it was the next morning. During the day I would take naps on the couch but my mother didn't like that. She wanted me to get out and play during the day so that I was able to sleep well at night. Obviously this led to me losing an insane amount of sleep because I was too scared to sleep at night but my mom wasn't going to let me sleep all throughout the day. It had been around 2 to 3 weeks since the first incident happened and I was starting to think that maybe my mom was right and that it had all been a dream. One day I was particularly exhausted and fell asleep on the couch in the living room and slept until the middle of the night. I woke up to a pitch black room and immediately began to have a panic attack. Even when I would wake up in my own room, I had night lights that always stayed on. I got off the couch and tried to use the power light on the TV to help me have a point to walk to because my room was the first room on the hall coming out of the living room. When I got to my room and opened the door, the man was sitting on the edge of my bed. As terrified as I was I slowly closed my door back shut, hoping that the man hadn't seen me open the door and I ran to my mom's room screaming and crying again telling her that he was in my room. She gets up and walks with me to my room and again there isn't anything there. I remember being so confused at the time and questioning what was real and what wasn't. I told my mom I wanted to go stay with my dad because I was too scared to stay with her anymore. After contacting my dad, I told him everything that had been happening at my mom's and he talked to her and decided I would come live with him. Talking to my dad about it was tough too because he didn't really believe what I was saying. He also thought I was just having bad dreams because I was watching scary movies or something at my mother's. Fast forward a few years and my mom remarried with a man that had 3 children, the youngest of which was 6 years old. Over the time that they stayed in the house the youngest boy started to experience similar things to what I had. When my mom told me that he was saying the same things that I was when I stayed there, I wanted to be like I told you so. At this point my mom believed me and sold the house not long after. Nowadays we just refer to her old house as the haunted house. It's still really hard to talk to other people in person about it. For some reason it just makes my eyes water uncontrollably. When I was 9, my parents bought a derelict farm/abandoned farm deep in the woods of Sweden. This isn't the first time my parents have done this. My parents had just sold the first farm after they made the farm livable. I was sad to part with it, but looked forward to a whole new world of adventure and discoveries. Nothing spooky ever really happened on the first farm. I was never scared of the old house or the woods around it. I could be alone for hours in the woods just playing and making dents for the picnics with my imaginary adventure team. Something changed though when we bought the second farm. The first couple times we came to paint and build on the house, nothing happened. I was just exploring the different buildings and the woods around us. This farm had 4 buildings. The main house, a garage, a stable. We never found out what the 4th building was. It was badly damaged after it had burned down. I was really into horses and used all my time in the stable. We had owned the house for a year when something happened. I was in the stable playing with some hay when I suddenly felt like someone had their hands around my neck and squeezed. I couldn't breathe. I instantly ran out of the stable, and as soon as I saw my mom I could breathe again. But I was coughing and wheezing and couldn't stop. I tried to explain what was happening, but my throat hurt so much that I kept coughing. My mom rushed me inside the house and got me some water. I was still coughing and gasping after 15 minutes, so my mom decided to drive me to the hospital while my dad stayed with my brothers. I eventually stopped coughing, of course, and nobody could really understand what happened. Just an FYI before the next part. Up until I was 14, I have never had any allergies and had my first asthma attack when I was 13. The episode was written off as an asthma attack. Looking back and now knowing what an actual asthma attack felt like, I call bullshit. After that whole thing I stopped playing in the stable and opted for playing in the woods with my brothers. The next time something happened was when I was 11. I had woken up in the middle of the night to hear someone walking. I stood up from my bed and walked past my parents who were sleeping in the same room. I went to the kitchen and saw a black figure standing in the middle of the kitchen. Had I not noticed, I walked by my dad, I would have thought it was him. I was frozen, but something came over me and I turned around and walked straight to bed. I couldn't sleep though. I felt prickly eyes staring at me the whole night. I told my parents the next day that I saw a man in the kitchen, but they told me I was probably dreaming. I probably was dreaming. But after seeing that figure, I always felt like I wasn't welcome and felt eyes on me at all times. One occurrence, though, left me terrified of the house, and I begged my parents to leave me with my grandparents whenever they went to the farm. One day I was on my computer chatting with some online friends and playing a game. My parents wanted to go grocery shopping and asked if I wanted to come too. I declined, being really into my game, and they asked me if I was sure. I nodded and they left with my brothers. I immediately regretted not going as soon as the door slammed shut. A feeling of terror overcame me. I was scanning the whole room I was in, scared to find something I shouldn't have. The car had already pulled onto the dirt road and out of sight by now. The sound of the car drifted away and I was left in terror and silence. The silence somehow grew louder and louder until it was deafening and I felt a pop in my ears. I was shaking and my teeth were chattering. Then I heard a tap. Then another. And another. The taps was in a predictable rhythm. I knew it would be at least 2 hours until my family came home since the grocery store was miles away. I had to endure it, but something sent me running out of the house. In the doorway to the kitchen I saw a figure stalking towards me. This time I knew it wasn't a dream. My lungs felt like they were being crushed and I began getting a headache. I stared at the figure for a good 5 seconds, then, in pure shock, I sprinted out of the back door and towards the dirt road. I was thankful I was still wearing my flip-flops after eating breakfast outside. I ran up the dirt road aiming to get help from the neighbors who live a 20-minute walk away. I didn't expect to see our car come down the road. I walked to the side of the road and my parents hopped out and asked what happened. I burst out crying. So they put me in the car and I refused to go inside the house again. My parents thought I had made it all up and told me I was paranoid. I stand by what I saw. Years later and I still hate that farm. I've visited once since but never again. Whatever was on that farm hated me. Me specifically. I just have one thing that is bothering me a lot. How long was I frozen in place? Like I said, it takes hours for us to go grocery shopping. It felt like what happened was in a span of 5 to 10 minutes. I don't know where to begin this story as it occurred from ages 9 to 16, but I guess I'll just start at the beginning. As of today I am a 28-year-old female, but growing up I was a very sensitive little boy. My parents adopted me as a baby and I never met my birth family until 2012. It was then I learned that every woman in my birth family, sister, grandmother, late mother, etc., were all quite sensitive to the paranormal. Nobody in my adoptive family had any sort of sensitivity, but they all did things subconsciously. So when I was 9, my family moved to a very nice house in St. Helena, Napa overlooking the valley. It was a beautiful 2-story house, but in a weird way since it was on a hill. From the road, The second story was the first story, but from the backyard down the mountain both floors were visible. I believe this is called a sloped lot. Upstairs was the garage, linked to the main house by a breezeway leading to the laundry room. To the right from there was the study, straight ahead was a living room and the kitchen. A hallway ran parallel to the kitchen meeting at a family/dining room, where the front door sat, though none of us actually used it. Right next to that was the stairs, oh the dreaded stairs, leading down to the one long hallway connecting the bedrooms. Experiences began happening immediately after we moved in. Part of me believes it was drawn to the negative trauma I suffered at the hands of my abusive father, who focused his rage mostly on me, and that was why I was targeted out of my brothers, but that is just a theory. The first of many experiences was when the whole family was at my middle school for a scholastic book fair. I remember having a sudden twisting in my gut when my parents got a call that our backyard was on fire. To this day, nobody knows how it happened, it just started. Then the real fun began. It started out slowly, and only ever happened downstairs. My brothers and I would wake up and see a man walking back and forth on the patio, glancing through the French doors of our bedrooms as he passed. We never felt malice from him, though, and we all recall seeing him. What makes that particular bit interesting is that from a child's perspective, usually the male entity would be malicious while a female entity could be a protector. In my house, it was the polar opposite. Myself and my brothers felt a dark presence lurking downstairs in the hallway that would affect all three of us to the point we would take the stairs 2 or 3 at a time as fast as possible. I would have recurring nightmares about struggling to get to the top of the stairs with something behind me. In one particular dream I was reaching for the top stair and the entity caught me and stapled my mouth shut so I couldn't scream. Keep in mind, I was too young for these things to naturally come to me. In the beginning the door to my bedroom would slam in the wee hours of the morning so loudly it would wake my father. He insisted it was a draft even though no one else's doors would do it and, again, it slammed with massive force. We had to put a 10-pound bookend in front of it. Not much later, the entity in the hall would probe our rooms to see who was the most sensitive. My older brother who slept at the end of the hall nearest the darkness outgrew his empathic sensitivity, and my younger brother eventually stopped as well, but I remained more sensitive than ever and it knew. That's when I met her. At first the entity introduced itself as a kind protector from the man on the balcony, but I knew that was a lie. She would stand at the far end of the hallway and wait. Not that she was actually there, there was no one there, but it was more of a feeling of dread. It wasn't darkness, or blackness, but more that it physically sucked in the light around it like a black hole. She would come to me in dreams as various entities but the man would always show up and protect me. Mind you, I knew neither her nor the man. And the fact that the house was built on an inactive volcano littered with limestone and obsidian probably boosted energy or what have you. For about 7 years I would wake up promptly at 3 a.m., sweating bullets, hearing someone running back and forth in the hallway, panting as they passed my room, repeatedly until around 5 a.m. when it began to get light. The first face-to-face incident with this creature was when I woke up as scheduled at 3 a.m. and, like clockwork, heard the panting and pacing in the hallway. After about 20 minutes I got too scared to sit there doing nothing and reached to the dresser by my bed and turned on the light. The panting and pacing stopped and I waited through about 10 seconds of soul-crippling silence before it happened. Long, gnarly, shadowy fingers slowly gripped the door frame one by one. I heard the wood of the frame creak slightly as the wispy fingers pulled into the bedroom. Before my brain could process what I was seeing, I heard her gasp. Like, audibly gasp. The fingers retreated in pain and I sat in silence until the sun came up 2 hours later. That was the first time I realized I had a weapon against this thing. I still don't fully understand it, but she couldn't exist in light. While that alone brought tears to my eyes recalling it, there was one other experience that haunts me to this day. Plenty of years had gone by and I had just turned 14. My father was a prominent doctor in the area and he was planning on taking my mother to a fancy hospital gala the same night my little brother had a sleepover at a friend's house and my older brother was out college shopping in some other county. It was the first time I had the house to myself at night. I begged them to reschedule or hire a babysitter. They told me I was old enough to be a babysitter and that I needed to just grow up. Everyone in my family, them included, experienced weird happenings but they all preferred to turn a blind eye, so my pleas fell on deaf ears and I was left alone. I spent the first half of the evening upstairs where it was safe, occasionally glancing towards the staircase for any activity from the living room while the TV distracted me. About 10 or 11 p.m. I remember thinking that I was too old to be scared to be by myself and I could sleep downstairs alone if I wanted to. I kept the lights on upstairs and slowly descended the staircase, feeling the darkness getting closer with every step. When I reached the last step I leapt to the light switch and hit it, illuminating the hallway. Shaking violently, I hurried to my bedroom through the eerie quiet. My footsteps on the carpet were the only sound to break the silence. I finally slunk into my bedroom and quickly turned on the dresser light, jumping into bed as I stared into the lights shining through the downstairs. Going over in my head that all doors were locked, all windows were closed, and as long as these lights were on I was safe. The lassitude of Morpheus overcame me and my mind began to wander in the fields of Nod. I fell asleep. Unlike the usual times I woke up at night, this time was slightly different. I woke up suddenly, completely alert with the fight or flight response already kicked in. I was facing the wall but was absolutely terrified. I felt like if I moved or even breathed too loudly it would spell immediate death. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, but was most likely only a few minutes, before I mustered up the courage to roll over. When I finally did, my heart sunk. All the lights in the house were off, and a womanly shadow was standing in the doorway. The thought that maybe it was my mother popped into my head before I realized that she was with my father at the Gale all night, and they were staying at a hotel till morning. I just sat there, frozen, locked in a gaze with this creature who finally made it through the threshold of my doorframe and into my room, a feat she had yet to accomplish. I close my eyes and repeat in my head, it isn't real, like a personal mantra. Trying to control my breathing as I shake and shiver violently, I decide to take a peek and see if she's still there. Surely she can't come in further. I open my eyes. It's standing right over me, at the edge of my bed looking down at me. Not with eyes, it had no eyes. What it did have, was a large, toothy grin amidst the wispy shadows of its body. I dare not scream or even move, but hold the gaze as I hear a deep rumble emanating from the swirling torrent of darkness that was this creature. Having grown up terribly abused, I knew fear, but this was something different. I had never been this afraid before in my life. It was no longer creaks or shadows darting in the corner of your eye. I was face to face with something else. Something not of this world. And it wanted me. I knew in this moment as its mouth began to expand that if I did nothing, I would die. So I did the only thing I could think of in the moment. My body suddenly lurched upwards from the bed toward the entity and I screamed at it. Not a scream of fear, but more of a war cry, like it could try to kill me, but I wasn't planning on making it easy. My face almost went through it as I lurched up before it recoiled and let out an unearthly wail. I'm guessing it wasn't expecting resistance, but I actually heard it as it left the room, feet on the carpet and everything. Within moments all the lights in the house were back on and I just sat there shivering in shock until the dam broke and I began to cry. I just cradled my pillow and rocked back and forth on the bed, sobbing, until the sun came up and my parents came home. My family, devout Catholic doctors, were already skeptical of these things and didn't believe me, attempting to convince me it was a night terror or sleep paralysis. Only I could move, I could think, I wasn't stuck. It actually happened. I know I didn't dream it because I stayed awake until the next day. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but this was just the kind of thing that happened in this house. I believe it was limited to that specific location because it didn't follow me to college or anywhere beyond there. I fear for those who moved in when my parents sold it, but it would be cool to get in touch with who lives there and ask if they've experienced similar things. We did have trouble selling it. It was on the market for years. Anytime someone would come to view it, they would get creeped out and leave. Anyway, that's my story on my first face-to-face with a non-human entity. I hope you liked it. I personally don't believe in demons or anything goaty, but I'll respect you if you do. If you have any theories on what it could have been, feel free to comment.